43-year-old Nathan Gingles ambushed his estranged wife, Mary. Her father and daughter were also in her Tamarack home. Nathan allegedly shot Mary's father during a fight, so she ran, screaming for help, door to door, Nathan following with little Serafina at his side.
She was a mother, a teacher, a daughter, a woman who loved her little girl more than anything in this world. For months, she lived in fear, checking over her shoulder, locking every window twice, jumping at every sound in the hallway. Her name was Mary Gingles, and her voice had echoed through police dispatchers' headsets 14 separate times. 14 times she reached out, asking for help. Pleading to be heard. Begging someone, anyone, to believe that the man she once trusted might kill her. But on the 15th time, there was no second chance. At 5:02 a.m., in the early hours of a quiet Sunday morning, her door burst open. Her heart must have raced as she grabbed her daughter's hand. Maybe she thought she had seconds. Maybe she believed, just for a moment, that she could run. That she could escape. She didn't. What unfolded inside that small Rock Hill home defies comprehension. It wasn't just a murder. It wasn't just a domestic dispute gone too far. It was a complete failure, of the systems meant to protect her, of the warnings she gave so clearly, of the people who should have stopped it. And at the center of it all, watching in frozen silence, was a 4-year-old girl who will carry the memory of that morning for the rest of her life. This story isn't just about what happened that day. It's about everything that led to it. It's about missed chances. It's about silence where there should have been action. And it's about a man who walked past every red flag, with nothing stopping him until 3 people were dead. Mary. Her father. A neighbor who tried to help. In the end, it only took minutes. But the warning signs stretched for months. Stay with us, as we unravel the final hours of Mary Gingles. The choices that cost lives. And the little girl who saw it all. Narrator, steady and focused, with growing tension. Rock Hill, South Carolina. A small city where people leave their doors unlocked, where neighbors wave from their porches, and where Sunday mornings are meant for coffee and quiet. But on March 16, 2025, as the sun began to rise, that peace was shattered. Mary Gingles lived on a quiet street with her 4-year-old daughter and her father, Robert McDaniel. Her home was modest, nothing extravagant, just a place where she was trying to rebuild. She had recently separated from her husband, Nathan Gingles, a man whose temper had grown colder with each passing month. What began as distance between them had turned into fear. Then control. Then threats. She was a schoolteacher, devoted to her students, deeply loved by her daughter, and endlessly resilient in the face of what she had been living through. Behind her smiles, though, was exhaustion. The kind that builds when you're sleeping with one eye open. When you're counting the seconds between messages, worried about when he'll show up again. Nathan Gingles wasn't just an estranged husband. He had a pattern. Controlling behavior that began subtly. Tracking her phone, questioning her movements, interrogating her about friends. But over time, the mask dropped. The shouting started. Then came the threats. By the time Mary left, she wasn't just trying to escape a bad marriage, she was running from a man who wanted to own her, even if it meant destroying her. She did everything she could. 14 separate calls to police. Reports of harassment. Records of threats. Documentation of his stalking behavior. She told them he was getting worse. She told them she didn't feel safe. Still, he remained free. Her father, Robert, had moved in not long before the end. A strong man in his 60s, calm but protective. He never said it out loud, but his presence was a shield. He knew something was wrong. He saw the way his daughter jumped when her phone buzzed. He saw the fear she tried to hide. And next door, James Jordan. A longtime neighbor, the kind of man who shoveled your driveway in winter and brought over food when he heard someone was sick. He had known Mary since she was a teenager. He looked out for her. He checked in. And when the time came, he didn't hesitate. That morning, Mary may have sensed it. Maybe it was the silence outside. Maybe the dog barked. Maybe she heard the footsteps before the door cracked open. Nathan had returned. And this time, he wasn't there to talk. He brought a gun. No one knew the full extent of what would happen in the next few minutes. But by the time it was over, 3 people would be dead. And the only one left to witness it all, the only one left standing, was a 4-year-old child who had already lost her whole world before the sun fully rose. This is the story of how it came to that. The decisions that led to it. And the lives that were lost because no one listened soon enough. Narrator, tone low, steady, building urgency with each word. The calls started months before the killings. Not once. Not twice. But 14 separate times, Mary Jingles dialed 911. Each time, her voice carried more urgency, more fear, more desperation. He's outside again. He's threatening me. I'm scared for my daughter. The words changed, but the fear behind them never did. She reported that Nathan Jingles had followed her car, sent threatening messages, waited outside her home in the dark. He called obsessively. He shouted through windows. He sent texts laced with fury and control. He accused. He demanded. He loomed over her life like a shadow she couldn't escape. Police came to her home more than once. Sometimes they talked to Nathan. Sometimes they didn't find him. But time and time again, they left without making an arrest. There were no charges filed. No protective order ever enforced. Nathan had not laid a hand on her, yet. That seemed to be the threshold. But Mary knew better. She understood what was coming. She told friends it was just a matter of time. She said, "If I end up dead, it's him," one friend later told reporters. She was afraid to sleep, said another. She kept saying, "He's going to come back." Mary tried to file for an order of protection, but like many victims of psychological and emotional abuse, she was met with delays. With questions. With the kind of procedural friction that discourages so many from continuing. She didn't stop. But the system didn't move fast enough. In the final week of her life, the fear reached a new height. Mary told her father, Robert, that Nathan had grown more erratic. She told her lawyer she feared for her life. She told a coworker that she'd started sleeping with her bedroom door locked, not for privacy, but for survival. That same week, she reached out to James Jordan, her neighbor, and asked him to check on her in the mornings. Just in case. Her daughter, just 4 years old, started waking in the night. She grew startled by footsteps. She became anxious at the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Children don't always understand danger, but they can feel it. And this little girl felt it closing in. Mary tried to shield her, but how do you protect your child from a threat that never leaves? How do you explain that the man who once kissed her goodnight now made her mother tremble? She put in security lights. She checked the locks 3 times before bed. She made plans to move. She called again. And again. She told the police that she believed Nathan would kill her. No one can say they weren't warned. And still, no arrest. Still, no protection. Every sign was there. Every warning. Every plea. The tension didn't just rise, it suffocated. Until, at last, it broke. Narrator, somber, unwavering, with a cadence that slows for weight and pauses where it hurts. It was just after 5 in the morning. The street was still. No cars. No voices. Just the hum of porch lights and the faint rustle of trees before dawn. Most of Rock Hill was still asleep. But inside one home on a quiet block, terror was unfolding. Nathan Jingles had returned. He wasn't supposed to be there. He no longer lived there. He and Mary were in the middle of a divorce. She had made it clear she didn't want him near her or their child. She had made it clear he was dangerous. But Nathan came anyway, this time, armed with a gun. No one knows for certain how he got inside. Whether he forced the door open or used a key he wasn't supposed to have. But what we do know is that within moments, Mary was running, trying to shield her daughter, trying to get away. She didn't make it far. He shot her first. The bullet tore through the silence and shattered everything. Robert McDaniel, Mary's father, was in the house. It was still early. He may have just been waking up. He likely heard the shot. And as any father would, he rushed toward the danger. He found it waiting. Nathan fired again. Robert dropped to the floor. Across the yard, James Jordan heard the noise. A loud bang, maybe two. Then silence. Then a scream. He knew Mary was in danger. He'd promised to watch out for her. He didn't hesitate. James ran to the house. He was met at the door. Shot before he had a chance to speak. 3 people. Gone in minutes. Inside the house, amid the stillness, one small figure remained. Mary's daughter, just 4 years old, stood frozen. There was no one left to run to. No one left to hold her. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She knelt beside her mother's body, her small hands covered in blood. She was later found holding Mary's hand. Silent. Still. The child had watched her mother die. Had seen her grandfather fall. Had witnessed a neighbor gunned down at the door. When police arrived, they were responding to multiple calls from neighbors who'd heard the gunshots. But by the time officers stepped into the house, it was too late. The damage had already been done. They found the front door slightly open. The lights were on. The smell of gunpowder still hung in the air. 3 bodies lay where they'd fallen. And in the middle of it all, a little girl, alive, but forever changed. That morning wasn't just a murder. It was a massacre. A complete and final silence after months of noise, cries, alarms, all ignored. The child was taken from the home and placed into protective care. She didn't speak at first. When asked what happened, she said just 5 words. Daddy hurt Mommy and Papa. What had been fear became reality. What had been warnings became evidence. And what should have been preventable became irreversible. In the hours following the killings, Nathan Jingles vanished. The man responsible for ending 3 lives, his estranged wife, her father, and their neighbor, walked away from the bloodied house and disappeared into the early morning. Law enforcement launched an immediate search. Roads were blocked. Helicopters took to the skies. But there was no high-speed chase. No final standoff. Nathan was found several hours later in a parking lot just outside the city limits. He offered no resistance. No words. No remorse. He was taken into custody without incident. By mid-morning, he was booked into the York County Detention Center, charged with 3 counts of murder and child endangerment. Held without bond. His mugshot showed a man expressionless, cold, unmoved, as though the gravity of what he had done hadn't reached him. Or worse, as if it had. News of the murders spread quickly. Local headlines gave way to state coverage, and then the national spotlight turned toward Rock Hill. The questions began immediately. Why did it take 3 deaths for someone to finally stop him? Why was nothing done after Mary called for help 14 separate times? Why was a man with a documented history of threats never arrested? Mary's name became a symbol, of fear ignored, of red flags left unchecked, of a justice system that watched but didn't act. At community vigils, friends and strangers held candles. They held signs that read, "She told you." They left teddy bears and flowers at the foot of her porch. People cried, but they also burned with quiet rage. Because Mary had done everything she was supposed to do. She asked for help. She documented her fear. She protected her child. And still, it wasn't enough. The town of Rock Hill was left to grieve, but also to reckon. Because this wasn't just about a tragedy, it was about a pattern. About how the law treats women when the bruises are invisible. About how often warnings are considered insufficient until a body is found. Prosecutors moved quickly. Nathan Jingles was formally charged with 3 counts of murder and child endangerment. Given the brutal nature of the killings, and the presence of the child, authorities confirmed they would seek the death penalty. But there are no verdicts that undo what happened. No sentence that erases what the child saw. The little girl, now left without a mother, a grandfather, or the neighbor who tried to save them, was placed into protective custody. Relatives stepped forward, but trauma this deep doesn't fade. It lingers. It follows. Her entire world ended before she could even spell her last name. A fundraiser was launched in her name, an effort to cover therapy, schooling, future care. Donations poured in from across the country. Notes of love. Apologies from strangers. Messages saying, she should have been protected. And perhaps the only silver thread in the dark, Mary's case sparked something. State lawmakers began talks on new legislation, stronger protective orders, mandatory intervention protocols after repeated DV calls, stricter firearm restrictions for accused abusers. Her voice, once ignored, began to echo where it mattered. But only after it was gone. Nathan Jingles now waits in a cell, alone with what he's done. He will face a courtroom. A judge. Possibly a jury. But long before then, he had already been judged, by a community, by a nation, by a daughter who will never forget what she saw. Do you think Mary's death could have been prevented? Should law enforcement be held accountable for ignoring warning signs? What's your theory on why the system keeps failing women like Mary? We want to hear from you. If this case struck a nerve, if it left you angry, heartbroken, or questioning how many others like Mary are out there right now, drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let this space be more than just a story. Let it be a conversation. And if you believe these stories matter, stories of justice denied, of voices lost, and of the people who deserve to be remembered, subscribe for weekly deep dives into the cases that can't afford to be forgotten. Because Mary Jingles asked for help. And now, we're listening.